Can you take us back to the beginning of everything? Because, I know it's a long story and everything like that, but a lot of people out there maybe don't even know the genesis of this. Can we go from where this all started to take us to where we are now?
Sure. The father, in this case, Dustin Brown, and the birth mother were engaged to be married. She became pregnant. The father wanted to move up the wedding date so the child would be born in the marriage. The mother refused to move up the date and eventually broke off the engagement. Mother lived in Bartlesville, Oklahoma area. Father, although from that area, was actually living in Lawton, Oklahoma because he was active duty Army and he was stationed at Fort Sill. Communication broke between the couple at some point. There's a lot of disputed facts about who did what and who tried to contact who that are still disputed to this day. But what we do know is that the birth mother did not tell the father that she was placing the child for adoption. She began working with the adoption agency and was matched with the couple in South Carolina. They were present when the child was born, and they stayed in Oklahoma for a few days before taking the child back to South Carolina, where they filed an adoption petition. When the father was served with the adoption petition 4 months later, he was 5 days from deployment to Iraq. He immediately hired an attorney. He filed a case in Oklahoma seeking custody of the child. He also filed in the South Carolina case a stay under the Civil Service Member Relief Act, asking the court not to take action because he was going to be deployed. The adoptive couple appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court. That case was heard in April of 2012. In July of 2012, the South Carolina Supreme Court affirmed the family court decision, which means they upheld the decision to transfer custody to the father.
Okay.
The adoptive couple then appealed, filed a petition for cert to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court accepted the case. They heard oral argument on April 16th of this year, and we are now simply awaiting an opinion from the South Carolina Supreme Court.
So this issue, somewhere along the lines, went from this independent couple's issue to sort of an Indian country issue wildly, across the nation, because, you talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act and how it's put into use, how it's put into practice. This is a perfect case. How did Cherokee Nation decide that it was going to be something that you pursued? Did he have to come to you?
We actually became involved when we got a call from the grandfather. Dustin Brown's father called us and said, my son's child's being adopted. We're Cherokee citizens. I don't know that Dustin's dad knew exactly what the Indian Child Welfare Act was, but he knew enough about it to know to call his tribe. And the Indian Child Welfare Act, for anyone who doesn't know, was passed in 1978. It makes some basic requirements before. There are several parts of it, but what's pertinent to this case is that before you can terminate the rights of a parent of an Indian child, there are certain procedural steps that have to be taken and burdens of proof that have to be met. And those are sometimes higher than the state law. And because of the Indian Child Welfare Act, the state of South Carolina was not able to terminate Dad's parental rights in this case.
So you guys made the arguments before the Supreme Court now. We're in that waiting process. Do you feel good about the case that you took to the Supreme Court from the Cherokee Nation standpoint?
I'm optimistic. I think that the lower courts correctly applied the law to the facts, that there's no question about that. The concern in this case is some bigger Indian law issues. The Supreme Court has said repeatedly that Indian law is not based on race, that it's based on political status, and in this case it's based on a child's membership or eligibility for membership in a tribe. The opposition in this case has argued before the Supreme Court that this is race-based law and that it's unconstitutional. So if the court stays on the narrow issues that were presented about how this statute is interpreted, then I think that the father retains custody, no question. But what the bigger issue that Indian country is worried about is some kind of restriction on the Supreme Court's previous decisions about what Indian law is and is not, and what Congress can do in regard to not only tribes but individual Indians.
And that's a bigger issue altogether, right? I mean, I think we're talking about the case, but we're also talking about precedents set from here on out that will possibly affect, as you said, all tribes in different ways on how the letter of the law is absolutely deciphered and put into practice on these tribes. So in that sense, people, not even Cherokee Nation, people should be watching this and with bated breath waiting on the Supreme Court ruling.
And I will say that we had a tremendous support from tribes. Of the 500 plus tribes, 333 joined different supporting briefs before the Supreme Court. This was one of those interesting areas. Sometimes with Indian law, tribes come down on different sides of the law because different laws affect different tribes differently. But this absolutely was a case that every single tribe was supporting Cherokee Nation and supporting the father. And I mean, the outpouring of support was just overwhelming. We were receiving calls from tribal elected officials, tribal attorneys, ICW workers saying, what can we do to help? And it was I do want to give a thanks to the Native American Rights Fund, NARF. They coordinated all of the supporting briefs that were filed with the United States Supreme Court, and they were the ones out there getting the tribes together. You know, we had briefs filed by specific tribes in specific states work together to file one brief, and then we had other tribes join national briefs, and we've had tribes, you know, really come together at different educational and training opportunities surrounding the Indian Child Welfare Act because of this case, and it really has been overwhelming from the support that we've received from Indian country everywhere.